Disclaimer: the following video will contain spoilers. A dog named Indy himself begins seeing a dark entity that has seemingly attached himself to his owner, Todd, Shane Jensen. Now, he must do everything he can to protect his best friend. Good Boy was one of those movies that makes you say, gee, why didn't I think of that? This interesting concept of a horror movie through the eyes of a dog seems so intriguing that I went to see this movie enthusiastically. However, by the end of it, I was left disappointed. Don't get me wrong, there are several shots here and there that were quite good, and I loved seeing and knowing the hard work that was put into this project. The team's 3-year dedication to completing this unique concept could have been inspirational, but due to the movie's major flaw, it undermined the hard work that was put into this movie. That major flaw is the lack of substance to the story. This incomplete and confusing narrative made me see this movie as nothing more than just a concept film. One that isn't fully fleshed out, shown to production studios to gain funding to make a better end product. In case you don't want to have your story feel the same way, always keep the story in mind. Create that sturdy foundation so your movie holds weight. Therefore, Good Boy failed in one major flaw, and one minor flaw that is associated with the major flaw. That being the Kuleshov Effect. Let's begin. The latent potency. At the end of the movie, the director, Ben Leonberg, gives a thank you message. Here, he also explains how Indy is not a trained actor, his 3-year commitment, and explains how he managed to make that intense atmosphere using the Kuleshov Effect. The Kuleshov Effect is an editing principle that works with storytelling. This effect helps viewers derive meaning from 2 juxtaposition shots instead of a single one, creating emotion and narrative where none inherently exists. In other words, depending on how these images are organized, an editor can create the illusion of emotions based on what the images convey. In this case, horror. Speaking in English, what it means is that constructing a sequence using 3 shots, for example, helps add context and substance to a certain situation or interaction. For example, it is usually done by having a character look at something, cut to what this character is seeing, then back to the first character and what he is currently thinking. By doing so, we can begin to understand the thoughts of our character without the need for dialogue or explanations, amplify a sort of emotion to even give the illusion of a certain atmosphere you want the audience to feel, tricking them into feeling more fear when time calls for it. The most well-known example is this one here. This man's neutral expression seems to change depending on the image interspliced between, showing hunger after seeing a bowl of soup, or lust after seeing a woman, to even depicting sadness after seeing a woman in a coffin. Here is where it gets tricky for me. If you were to ask me, despite understanding this phenomenon, I never understood these examples. I never really saw this man's expression change. Besides that, the whole sequential definition seems self-explanatory to me, as films are a visual medium for storytelling after all. The way I view this effect is merely a way to teach you that editing matters. The effect just demonstrates a self-explanatory definition of providing a story visually. Yet, what I've yet to see is an explanation on how this principle cannot work alone and how you must commit to the context you want to provide. Let me put it this way. The effect only provides a puzzle piece per sequence, but you still need to have a story for that puzzle piece to fit into. Another reason I don't understand how people define this effect or the usage of these examples is, to my understanding, in a film, visuals aren't the only way to gain context. There's actions, words, score, cinematography, etc. All of which paints a picture, creates the atmosphere, and gives the audience that same illusion or of emotion the Kuleshov effect is said to carry. But all won't work unless you commit to the sequence and have a sturdy story. What I mean is that it is meaningless to give the illusion of horror if you don't have a good payoff. What's the point in giving an intense sequence using this effect to not follow through or it not serving any purpose within the story? And that is where Good Boy failed with this effect. The movie relies on providing the horror aspect by using this tool alone. While it gives the illusion of horror, trying to string it together with the story provided, it destroys this effect in my opinion. It also doesn't help that the story wasn't good, in the sense that it lacked substance. Therefore, whenever this effect was used, in the grand scheme of things, it didn't matter. In short, while it does provide puzzle pieces, by the end, my puzzle remains incomplete. I am missing puzzle pieces to this story. Though you can argue that Good Boy masterfully used the Kuleshov effect, I beg to differ. Yes, the way it was constructed gave the illusion that Indy was going through these emotions, putting us in a tense state as we fear for the dog's survival and cheer for his performance. However, because the overall story lacked and 80% of the horror didn't commit or give a good payoff, this effect did not fully work in the movie. This brings me to Good Boy's major flaw. A story, not story. Every movie has a story and a reason behind it, something the movie is based on or about, that in itself holds value and some form of weight. It's about grief, or it's about acceptance. We know what the movie is going to be about based on what the story can be summed up to, like grief or acceptance. But no matter the reason, the story has to relate to its premise. For Good Boy, I read that it's about the unyielding loyalty of dogs and the acceptance of letting go. In itself, it sounds like a good premise. Yet the contents within the story don't really make me believe it's about that.
Senses and their human partners, dogs protected cave dwellers from unseen dangers and alerted them to the presence of predators. Mankind has left the caves, but the darkness haunts us still.
Sure, you can argue that there is a story. It's about a dog who sees a vision and tries to protect his owner. But Indy is a passive character. All he does is react to this mysterious entity. The two instances he actually does something is towards the end. That is, going to the neighbor for help and escaping the doghouse. But everything else, he's just observing Todd's erratic behavior, this mysterious figure, not understanding the visions, dreams, sounds, and objects he's witnessing. Everything is reactionary. So, in what way does the loyalty of the dog and must do everything to protect Todd come into play? And looking at Todd, he remains a static character as well. Him being a jerk seemed uncalled for because the movie didn't give me a reason for him to act this way.
I'm not trying to nag you. I really just want to make sure that you're okay.
You are so full of it.
What?
Can I have one day where I don't have to be a patient? Can you help me with that?
I'm not trying to make
Because
you...
whenever you call, and you call all the time, I'm just sitting here, dreading and waiting for you to feel like we've chatted enough that you can ask one of your inane questions.
Perhaps he's angry because he's going to die? Then why not accept comfort from family? From Indy? What is it with Grandpa's place that he likes so much? Does he have a job? The story doesn't provide any substance or context towards Todd's character, which as a result fails to connect with me or captivate me. Therefore, when his time was up, I was not sad. All I could think about was, well, it's about damn time, ruining the aspect of horror. And while I'm at it, there's no real horror in this movie. I know it seems I'm finding fault everywhere in this movie, or that I'm being too harsh or overly critical, but I just don't see how this movie can be classified as horror. The reason being is A, we don't understand what's going on. B, Indy's life seems to not be in any real danger. C, we don't know how close the entity is to killing Todd and or Indy. And D, the movie doesn't commit to the horror bit, where there's actual consequences to what appears to be attacks from the entity. There were not a lot of instances that really struck me with fear. A lot of the times where it's jump scares, I felt it needed to be cut 2 or 3 frames sooner. It also needs to have a better payoff to actually be considered horror. Because like I've mentioned, what's the point of seeing this entity attack Indy if Indy is not going to take any damage from it?
Indy? Okay, hold still.
And I was not the only one who felt this way. My little sister thought the movie was boring overall. The illusion did not work for us because the story lacked substance and context and a reason for us to care for these characters, making us fear and worry that these characters are going to die. Sure, Todd's deathbound, but we've seen that since the beginning. What's new? It was also unclear to me whether Todd actually had a condition or if it was the entity killing him. I assumed it was the entity given the weird substance from the bandage, but online it said he has terminal lung disease? So is he just going to die either way? Was this entity a personification of the illness itself? If so, what's the deal with the mud, the cave entrance, the hereditary ambiance or feeling to this entity latching onto this family? No matter how many times I see this movie, and believe me, I've seen it well over 4 times now, I still do not have a complete puzzle, nor do I see the horror in it. But I think what really takes the cake are Todd's last words. You're a good dog, but you can't save me. Not only does this indicate a change inside Todd, but it also indicates Indy's actions that we never saw. If Indy was an active character, yet Todd remained a jerk for some reason or another, only realizing his mistake before he dies, prompting these words to reassure Indy that despite his death, Indy is not to blame, can these words hold significance or weight? But enough yapping. Let's go over 3 examples, one from each section, beginning, middle, and end. Once Todd is discharged from the hospital, for some strange reason, he decides to move into his grandfather's house. Looking for the key to open the gate, Indy hears a growl behind him. Looking back, he sees a dark entity staring back at him. Todd's grunt makes Indy turn his gaze back to him. But when he looks back at the mysterious figure, it has disappeared. Here, I'd say this effect works well if we only view it through this sequence alone. Stay with me. Being the beginning, the story needs to establish that something mysterious is out there, lurking, waiting. Not understanding what this mysterious figure is, usually the characters brush it off. But we, the audience, know that something is definitely out there, putting us in that tense state, as the characters are either oblivious, haven't come to terms with it, or purposefully ignoring it. But, and here's the kicker, it depends on how the story progresses and how the characters act that fully captivate that tense state. It doesn't help that the same sequence was seen throughout the movie. Each sequence serves a purpose. The one depicted has a purpose of introducing the entity and having the audience begin to clutch our seats as the characters ignore this mysterious figure as it creeps closer and closer, but not attacking. But when the movie gets closer to the middle and it's still doing the same thing, serving the same purpose, observe entity peering the corner, reaction, and nothing more, then you start to lose me. So if we only look at the sequence alone, we see that the dog is confused and scared of this thing. We understand him. But by having these characters repeat the same sequence throughout the movie, we have no clear indication how close this entity is to achieving his goal, nor what these characters are actually going through. When we look at this sequence within the story, we begin to see that despite being accurate to horror movie tropes, it eventually doesn't lead anywhere, making the story lack.
Not tonight.
Moving on to the middle of the movie. I couldn't decide which of these two scenes to pick, so I'll just include both. At around 27 minutes, Indy is patiently waiting for his owner Todd to return back home. After hearing yet another howl, Bandit, Max, appears and leads Indy upstairs. Sniffing around, Indy spots a red bandana, similar to the one Bandit wears. Curious, he tries reaching for it, but upon smelling it, he gets a vision of Todd going downstairs, and a shadow entity following him shortly after. At first, Bandit observes, but when we come back to the dog, it's now Indy. It's clear that Bandit is trying to help Indy as he was in a similar situation. When the vision ends, the red bandana falls to the ground covered in blood. Indy gets scared and then hears thumping of something creeping closer. This entity is getting closer. So Indy hides under the bed for safety. But thankfully, it was just Todd. Again, the illusion of horror is present in this scene or sequence, only by viewing it alone. The reason being is that if this sequence serves as a spiritual vision, guided by Bandit, as a means to try to inform Indy of an incoming threat, I'd argue that nothing but the illusion of horror is achieved here. But the reason I wanted to include this sequence is what happens afterwards. That is, Indy spotting Todd's bandage, noticing that that's not blood. Something darker is at play here. Perhaps Bandit is right, assuming that this is a wake-up call. The second sequence is during the phone call where Vera wants to check up on Todd over the weekend, but Todd is agitated with Vera's constant checkups, or check-ins. Indy sees a door mysteriously open. Curious, he steps inside the room, being guided by his nose or smell. It leads him towards the chair we'd seen Todd's grandfather sitting in during these tapes. Visions appear of the grandfather, sick, coughing drastically, and as a muddy hand creeps, Bandit sits, looking at his poor owner, suffering. "Run!" he yells as something creeps closer behind the dogs, scaring Indy into peeing the floor. Frozen with fear, Indy is unaware of the figure behind him. Cut to black. While I did like the mystery behind the grandfather and the sort of guardianship Bandit's character plays, Larry Fessenden, most of the sequences used don't really serve a true purpose. Sure, Bandit might have offered visions of this entity attacking the owners, like the first sequence I mentioned, and perhaps it was Indy's wake-up call, where he now knows this entity is in fact true. What I'm seeing isn't just my imagination. The problem is, if this is in fact a wake-up call, where Bandit warns Indy that Todd is going to die if Indy doesn't do anything, or my owner died in a similar way, watch out, it would have been great to see Indy do something about it. And if this was a wake-up call, then the second vision he gets, would that also be considered a wake-up call? A warning? Is the grandfather saying run to Bandit, and by proxy Indy? Or was it just a hypothetical where he's actually saying it to Todd? Does this entity actually kill the dog? Or is it only after killing the owner that Bandit dies of hunger from staying where he last saw his owner? Or does he first need to go to the dog before getting the owner? When the entity was behind Indy, it seemed like he was caught or done for. But all he got was dirty? Was he marked for death? Is the entity trying to prevent Indy from saving his owner? If so, does that mean his owner can be saved? My point is, there was no real reason for the warning or vision, as Indy does nothing afterwards. No real stakes, as Indy isn't hurt. And no real indication whether this entity is after Todd, Indy, or both. Obviously, we can deduce that this entity is attacking Todd, but the contents of this sequence should have established this notion better instead of just focusing on providing the illusion of horror. The last scene can be found during the last 16 minutes of the movie. Indy's attempt to save Todd by getting Mr. Downs' Stuart Rudin attention failed because he got caught in a fox trap instead. Being saved by Todd was a futile choice because Indy's objective was to save Todd, since it appears he was being attacked. But Todd saves Indy like nothing had happened. Sure, he gets chained up, but Indy doesn't do anything to get Todd's attention to get him to realize he is going to die. There's something behind him. There's something going to attack him. I want to protect you. Todd seems to be angry with Indy and goes back inside, where he begins coughing sporadically. As Indy continues observing him through a window, he witnesses the entity staring back at him, almost mocking him, then slowly backing up as if he's telling Indy, "You can't do anything to save Todd now." However, instead of going for Todd, given that Indy is chained up, a fox howler grabs Indy's attention. He turns his back from the window he last saw the figure. Then, through the light from the lightning, the figure is shown to be right behind Indy. A thumping intense score plays. The figure was actually after Indy. Why? Unclear. Unfortunately, the figure loses his grip from Indy's throat and Indy hides inside the doghouse. Not knowing what to do, he remains inside until the entity reaches his hand from underground, managing to grab the chain, pulling Indy closer towards him. Towards the end, the stakes should be at its highest point, but Indy still remained unscathed. Even when it seemed like the end, this entity loses grip of Indy, allowing him to be free. If Todd was already marked for death or dying, then why go after the dog? He's going to die anyway. Why not just wait it out? It's not like Indy can do anything either way. It felt like the movie began right before Act 2A, because of how quickly the scene changed to Grandpa's place and how this entity was creeping closer. Also, how we never really got a clear understanding of Todd and Vera's character. If the movie provided more scenes in the beginning to understand our character, then perhaps I'd care for Todd dying. If Vera was so worried about Todd, why didn't she go visit him after finding out he went to Grandpa's? Especially if she believes this place is haunted or something. What were the reactions of Todd and Vera to their grandfather's death? What did Todd believe to achieve by going to Grandpa's? Todd mentions that everyone who was buried in his yard died at an early age. Yet the grandfather said that the household has been theirs for 6 generations. Not to mention that the grandpa was a grandpa. Why was it said that they couldn't find Bandit's body, yet opening the basement door, could you see him?
Your grandpa was out here with his dog, too. After we found his body, we never did find that dog.
What's the point of dragging him into the cave? Does it hold any significance? Or was it just for show? When he was dragged into the entrance, how was it that Indy was able to grab him and pull him out of the cave entrance when it's not a body? It's supposed to be his spirit or his soul, considering we just saw his body on the bed. In conclusion, Good Boy had such a nice concept, but completely missed the mark. The main thing I hear people praising this movie is the dog itself and his performance. But even then, it's just an illusion. Rod? Isn't that just called acting? Well, dear viewer, perhaps you are right here. But even if the dog's performance was stellar, I still wouldn't classify this movie as anything more than a concept movie based on the story and its execution. Believe me, it hurts for me to say this. Being a very independent filmmaker with little to no budget, I love seeing the love behind this project. I am fascinated with what they were able to achieve, but what makes me sad is how they put more effort in getting the illusion of emotion through the dog than using that illusion to amplify the story, to actually make it about the loyalty of dogs and accepting loss. I would like to reiterate, there are some pretty cool shots here and there. For example, this one. A candle blows out, and the next shot has Todd reflected on the TV screen, much like his grandfather on one of his tapes. He is next, and we know it. The reason I love this is because the movie does it visually. It tells us so much information without uttering a word. And if the movie put more emphasis on shots like this that helps tell a story, it would have been better. Again though, while the audience gets the illusion of horror, in the grand scheme of things, it did not serve a purpose. What purpose is there to consistently show the entity in the corner of a room, down the hall, behind Indy, if nothing happens as a result? What's the purpose of the entity attacking these characters if nothing actually happens afterwards? I didn't see the horror element anywhere because the movie kept providing the same illusion from beginning to end. Sure, it worked in the beginning because nothing has happened yet. As stakes are raised and the story progresses, you cannot use the same effect of a figure in the distance, watching, observing, and creeping closer towards the end. Instead, the movie should have added adequate stakes by providing obstacles Indy has to overcome, but only sees Todd's condition worsen, especially when the movie establishes that Todd is marked for death, i.e. Bandit's vision, the substance inside him, Todd's trance-like state, his constant coughing, and most obvious, the doctor's visit after coughing up blood. All the movie did was present the illusion of horror in a poorly written movie that was not executed well. All Indy does is observe, using a similar sequence much like the first one, which was look, see, and think. But anyway, those are just my thoughts. Did you enjoy the movie? Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you in my next review. Until then, God bless.